Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce and Jersey Finance for a very special International Women's Day event. I'm Julia Charlton, the current chair of the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, and today I am so delighted to be with an extremely talented and distinguished speaker to discuss women entrepreneurship in Southern Africa. So I'm with a businesswoman, academic mentor, and business development strategist for Jersey Finance, as well as a source of inspiration for all aspiring businesswomen across the world, Dr. Rufaro Macheka. It's such a pleasure to be with you. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. This fireside chat will be approximately an hour long. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A chat box at any time during the discussion, and we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A, and if not, we'll try and get back to you afterwards. So to start the event, Matina Hamad is going to give a brief presentation on current trends regarding women entrepreneurship in Africa. Matina is originally from Pakistan. She's an MPhil graduate from Hong Kong with an MPhil in political science and governance with a specialization in regional geopolitics and geoeconomics. And then after Matina's short presentation, I'm going to have a deep dive fireside chat with Dr. Macheka. So Matina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you here today. And Dr. Rufaro Macheka, so happy to see you here. You look lovely. I will just be providing a brief statistical infographic. So just to give you an overview of what the women entrepreneurs in Africa are doing, what are the challenges they are facing, and how they are breaking barriers despite all that. So just to start off, I want to talk about this particular statistic first and foremost, just because of the sheer volume of it. The African Development Bank has marked the current funding gap for female entrepreneurs at a rate of US $42 billion. What we mean by funding gap is the difference between the funding that women entrepreneurs get as compared to male entrepreneurs. And this is $42 billion for a variety of reasons. But the main reason that African Development Bank has highlighted is that financial institutions are the ones that they have preventive interest rates for female entrepreneurs. There's a bias there. There's a lack of collateral. There's a lack of insurance. And according to them, there's a genuine flaw in the legal and regulatory framework to promote private sector growth for female entrepreneurs. And then moving on, wage parity is a bit more obvious. What it means is that for every $1 that an African businessman earns, a female businesswoman, she gets 70 cents, which is a 30% difference. And this is not just the case for entrepreneurs. This is the case for any employees, any women in any sector, actually. So this is quite profound. And I believe that this is something that shows that we still have a long way to go. But moving on, this is equally as devastating, I feel, when it comes to funding, is that venture capital-wise, African female entrepreneurs, they just get 2.5%. Ever since 2018, they have only gotten this single-digit number in funding as compared to their male counterparts. In 2018, this number was 2%. It was getting better in 2019, but then due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it plummeted once more. And then also when it comes to profits, male entrepreneurs actually got 34% more as compared to female entrepreneurs for reasonings that include the ones that I already mentioned, the lack of funding, the lack of access to opportunities, but also the lack of access to educational skills, to exposure, to training. So as you can see, this has manifested in multiple ways, and this is one of the most profound ones. But it's not all doom and gloom, for sure. I want to say that despite such adversities, despite such struggles and barriers, female entrepreneurs in Africa have still prevailed. They're breaking barriers regardless of all this, and they're still thriving. As you can see that the continent of Africa has the highest rate of female entrepreneurship, 4 times that of Europe. And as you all know, Europe already has a pretty high rate of female entrepreneurship. And within the region of sub-Saharan Africa in particular, you can see that there are more female entrepreneurs than male entrepreneurs. And to be even more exact, I would actually like to really highlight the fact that 25.9% of sub-Saharan African women are female entrepreneurs, which means that 1 in 4 women in that region are these aspiring businesswomen that can bring so much potential to the economy. And just on that note, on what they can bring to the economy, I really want to highlight this research report by the Boston Consulting Group, which says that women can generate 2.5 times more profit as compared to male counterparts. And this they saw from a sample that they did this with 50% less funding than those of the male startups. So you can just see the sheer amount of potential that these women have. And then when you combine them with the overall workforce, when you include them in a gender diverse, gender inclusive group, you can actually get a 21% greater chance of above average profits. And this was done actually by sampling actual companies that have gender inclusive teams. So this is what they're talking about with the top 25 percentile. For the top 5 percentile, they actually found that these kind of gender inclusive executive teams can have a 36% above average profitability rate, which is profound. And can you just imagine if this was implemented all over the continent, just how much the profits would multiply? It's exciting to think about. And I left this for last because I found this so mind-blowing. But this potential that remains so untapped, just from these preliminary estimates that usually tend to be on the more pessimistic side, mind you, they say that the female entrepreneurship, if promoted properly, if prioritized properly, can actually generate 15 trillion US dollars for the GDP of Africa as a region. And further into this report, it's also actually highlighted that if female entrepreneurship is uniformly prioritized throughout the region, and in that best case scenario, just by 2025, just 3 years down the line, women entrepreneurship can actually add a value of 10% of the regional GDP of Africa. And if you want to put a price tag on, that's 316 billion US dollars that these women can offer you in just 3 years. So can you imagine if we put permanent, long-lasting priorities and policy frameworks to promote these women? I can't even put a number on that kind of potential. But, based on that, thank you so much, Julia, for giving me this opportunity, and over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Martina, for the insightful data. It's really great to see that although the situation's far from ideal, we're still seeing such positive growth. And it's so inspiring to see how women in Africa are breaking these barriers and flourishing in spite of a lot of the setbacks and difficulties that they have. So now we're going to hear from the expert and the person on the ground, Dr. Rufaro Macheka. So tell us all about yourself, Rufaro. Tell us about your professional journey. How did you decide you wanted to become a business developer and strategist? Was it something you always wanted to do?
Wow. Thank you so much, Julia and the team and the Commonwealth. And I am very excited to join you today. What I can say, to be honest, if you were to ask my 18-year-old self in terms of where I was going to be at this age, there is no way in my wildest dream I would have thought I would be where I am today. As an 18-year-old, I was a very shy girl coming from the rural areas. And as you know, coming from rural areas, we are taught not to lead. You need to listen to elders, you need to follow instructions. And that self-confidence was non-existent in my world. But if I look at the way I changed really my space and the way I want to live my life in the past 10 years, I was very deliberate in the actions that I took. I looked at my academic career, my work career as well in the financial services industry. And I realized that I'd acquired so much knowledge that I can be able to give back and contribute to the development of the continent. And hence, that's when I decided to do my PhD. And my PhD was very much around doing business in Africa. I said, I am an African. I need to understand Africa a bit better. So I spent time in a couple of African countries together with my research, looking at companies that are doing business in Africa. And if I look at where I am today, I've really become an expert in terms of understanding the continent and really being able to, to look at opportunities on the continent and contribute to the development of the continent.
That's amazing. So which university did you do your PhD at?
Yeah, I did my MBA and PhD at University of Cape Town. And as you know, University of Cape Town is really one of the top universities on the continent.
Yes.
Yes. And also they, when it comes to emerging market studies, they are also leading a lot in that regard. So I felt I needed to study with an institution which had so much institutional knowledge around the subjects that I wanted to understand. And
Yes.
that's why I am where I am today.
Yeah, and also one of the most beautiful universities in the world. And a lovely place. Yeah. So when you were on this journey, did you take inspiration from women leaders that you'd seen in your life to reach where you are today? Or, what inspired you? Did you have any role models?
To be honest, a lot of my life has been, it happened by accident. I have to be very honest with you. You come from the rural areas. The only thing that you see is people just working hard. There's nothing else that inspires you. The person who has succeeded a little bit, maybe is a teacher and a nurse. And I think going to boarding schools kind of, opened my mind a little bit. And I am very proud to have really pursued and imagined what was possible. I watched TV a lot. I used to read a lot of articles about women leaders. And if I look at like Oprah in South Africa, where I am, because I came to South Africa just I finished my high school education in Zimbabwe. And then I came to South Africa. That's where I really, I can say I developed a lot of my professional skills. And we used to watch a lot of Oprah Winfrey shows, and they were real stories that I picked up, along the way. I remember the other day I attended a presentation where they spoke about Coco Chanel, for example, and how she developed a brand. You look at your Mother Teresa's of this world, and in the end, you say, you know what, I can make some changes where I am with what I have. So definitely women, I've watched women who have done very well. And I've also identified some mentors. If I look at where I am as in today, there are some mentors that I still tap into their knowledge and to fill up my cup.
Right. Well, let's come on to mentors in a minute, but that really resonates with me. It's just so important, isn't it? So tell me about some of your mentors, the ones in the past and the ones who you still think about and look to.
Yeah, so there is, so if I look at, a lot of my mentors are not even necessarily older than me, which is actually quite surprising.
Yeah.
I've seen some very young women that I've worked with when I was working at Nedbank who have left Nedbank and they've really created careers for themselves. And I tend to tap into them. We normally have some coffees. Maybe it can be once in 3 months. I've got those. I also have women that have led organizations. Like there's a lady who used to be a CEO of Standard Bank Southern Africa, Southern and Central Africa, and she's retired now. We normally have chats, we go for a coffee and I tap into her knowledge. And it was quite, assuring when she said to me, she's also inspired by my journey, because I didn't think my journey can inspire someone who's achieved so much. Especially when I told her about what I'm doing the other day, she said, just tell me what you do in your business. And then when I explained to her, and she said, wow, you are actually quite, you are leading in this space, because this is really a new area which a lot of people haven't really gotten into. So, yes, when it comes to mentorship, I think I've learned to say it's not so much about older people. It's really about people that you track and you feel that they've got something that you can learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think that I've had the same experience. A very good friend of mine changed my life because she'd been a banker at one point in her career and she was a lawyer again. And she really, really made me go for it and inspired me. And it was another big step in my own career. So I totally get what you're saying, that often people the same age or younger can actually be pretty helpful. Yeah. And I think especially nowadays when there's so much technology and so on, when you look at what some younger people are doing, you think, wow, that is truly amazing, isn't it? Yeah. So do you mentor people yourself now?
I do. Yeah. So I really have a wide variety of mentorship that I offer. So I've got 2 daughters, and I must say, they always say, Mommy, you know what? You are our best mentor. You are, our role model. When I go and speak at certain platforms, they actually come with me. Like I think about 2 weeks ago, I was invited to speak at the Women in Financial Planning. It's really, young women who are in financial planning, and some of them have started their own practices. Yeah, and my two daughters came with, and they gave testimony in terms of, we have become what we've become because we saw this woman do it. And in a way, she showed us what is possible. And we believe that, we can be the best we can be. So like I mentioned, I've got my two daughters, and I really have a broad variety of people that have seen me in so many spaces that they've asked for me to mentor them, both men and women, by the way. And I'm also on a mentorship program like the Women in Tech, because I've joined this global organization, and I'm an advisory member of the South African chapter. And we were asked to raise our hands, those that would want to mentor other women. And I decided, with the skills that I have and with what I know, I can always share with somebody. You never know what they can learn. It might be one or two words. And yeah, so there are about 500 of us mentors at the moment. And I must say, it was quite assuring when I got a mentee in Australia. She wrote to me saying, you know what, I've seen your profile and I think you can mentor me. And I've got another one who's in Netherlands. And as an African, at times you tend to think, because I grew up in the rural areas, I don't have much to offer. But I still think with those dynamics that we grew up in, they actually made us stronger. They made us stronger.
Yes.
And they've really grown us to learn a whole lot more, to be able to give a lot as well.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Yes. So do you think it's necessary in any way at all in the modern world for a woman to decide between career and children? And, what advice would you give young women in this regard?
To be honest, I think as a woman, a lot of women can relate with this. A woman's career never goes in a straight line. It's just not possible. I always say, if one compares with a man's career, it's very easy in terms of what they can be. But with us women, because we still need to celebrate our femininity.
Yes.
And the minute we celebrate our femininity, it now means if you were at par with, let's say, a male colleague at work at that point, there are times when you're not going to be 100% mentally in the office because you're thinking about your child. You're going to spend time looking after the child. You are going to, your mind, part of it during the day is thinking about this child. And, looking after family and kids really become part of what we really become. So what I can say is one can still achieve a lot because with all those experiences, there's a lot that, one can bring onto the table. And also, if you look at, especially in today where we've got COVID, COVID has taught us that one doesn't have to go to the office every day. And even now, even the business leaders now allow us the flexibility that at times we used to ask before as women to say, can I work from home? Maybe half the day, can I work from home? Because one wanted to balance, let's say, home and work. So I must say, it is very possible. The world now knows one can still achieve even working from home.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know. And I also think, so what if women think about their children and maybe they're messaging them when they're working? I mean, men might be thinking about their golf or, whatever. I mean, different people think about different things. And of course, some men also think about their children. I can't be so sexist, but I really think that's true. So what about work-life balance? Do you think there's any such thing?
I strongly feel that it does exist, but one needs to be very focused. One needs to really have a clear mind in terms of what they want to achieve and be able to create time blocks for all those elements. Because if one is blown by the wind, depending on where the wind goes and one goes in that direction, one will never be able to achieve anything. I strongly feel one can achieve anything that they want to achieve. If I look at myself, for example, ever since I joined Jersey Finance, I do not have a physical office. I work from home most of the time, but I have a lot of meetings, either at offices with our gatekeepers or at times at coffee shops. But I also make sure that at times between meetings, I go for a walk. Lucky enough, I stay next to a nature reserve, so it gives me enough time to reflect. So I create time to go for those walks. I create time for family. Like today, my daughter has got a birthday, and we have agreed, she and I, we are just going to have a lunch, just the two of us. I know that she's going to have some stuff with her friends as well later, but it's really about creating time, identifying people, especially in the network where one can tap into to be able to grow, but creating those blocks of time for the different things that one wants to achieve. I strongly feel that is possible.
Well, that's very inspiring. I must say, I've never been great in the work-life balance area. I've always thought it was more stressful trying to achieve work-life balance. But I also think having children is amazing, because when I reflect on myself, I have 4 grown-up children, and I have a career. And I think really the only important thing I've really done is be a mother, actually, which, but I'm glad I did the rest as well. So what challenges or obstacles do you think women face in particular in finance and business development?
I'm really talking about my experiences and the times when what I also pick up from some of my colleagues or people in my network. There's a lot about, reading between the lines when people are in meetings. One is to really understand that at times what you see is not necessarily what's happening. So I think for me, it's really having that emotional intelligence to understand what's happening and be able to know what action you need to take. The other thing that for me, I think has really helped me a lot was being able to identify my personal skills gaps as well, to ensure that I can really compete at an equal level in terms of knowledge and skills, whether it's reading a lot of articles, whether it's supplementing with education, whether it's attending some conferences, but being able to be very savvy in the office, it's a very, very important thing. But for me, networks, I think, help a lot in terms of really understanding what's happening and also growing oneself. So those are some of the areas that I really picked up. And I must say, understanding the space is a very critical part, and knowing that you've got self-confidence and you know what you are doing, because people, the more knowledge you have, the more you know how to present that knowledge and share, the more people will trust what you do and what comes from you.
Yeah, totally. I think self-confidence is such a thing, isn't it? Especially for a lot of women. And if education and being on top of things helps you with that, that is so crucial. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about some of the women empowerment initiatives that you're involved with?
Wow. The one thing that even in my, what can I say, my secondary education, my tertiary education, I never had self-confidence. I think the one thing that I really struggled with, even I can say maybe the first 10 years of my career, if not even 20 years of my career, self-confidence really stuck with me for quite a while. But a lot of it, when I really look back, it really goes back to how one is brought up, especially in the rural settings, in terms where you are never taught to be a leader. You never believe that to be a leader because you are never really empowered to do that. So the one thing that I decided to do after I finished my PhD was really to look for platforms where I can learn to share my story. I can learn to participate. So if I look at the areas that have become very tangible in my space at the moment, Women in Tech, the South African chapter. I've been on the advisory committee for, I can say it's about a year or two now. And if I look at what we have achieved ever since I joined, we empower about 200 girls every week who do attend some of the lessons that we offer. So if you try to multiply that, it comes to almost about 8,000, per year. And then if you also look at, I've commented about the mentoring program where there are about 500, mentors, and from a global perspective. And I, as a mentor, I'm actually mentoring 3 entrepreneurs at the moment. Then if you also look at some of the stuff that we get involved in is there's a This Is Me program where we inspire young female entrepreneurs. And I've spoken to about 2 of those platforms. We donate computers to schools. And so that is just the Women in Tech. I also get involved in, there's a Me Time organization, which really started off with, a nonprofit organization. A certain lady decided, you know what, How can I help women with skills and also self-confidence? And then she basically created a platform where once a year women meet at, I don't know whether you know South Africa, the Sun City Hotel. Sun City is really one of the top hotels in South Africa. Someone will be saving for the year to attend that event where there will be a great, a lineup of great speakers that talk on so many different topics just to empower them. And what we've now done this year, just to really take that organization to another level, is to create a cooperative financial institution. And I am the chairperson of that institution. We started this year. We actually sacrificed our Saturdays, 8 to 10 in the morning, 2 Saturdays a month, just to meet as the board members to really get this thing off the ground, because we feel if it really works well, it's really going to help women with saving, to save money, to be able to borrow money and send their kids, to school. So there's a whole lot that we said, we can create something where we can help ordinary people. Yeah, so there are just a lot. I also have participate in Cherry Blair Foundation as well. I'm also their international advisor. There's also WomVest, which is also Women in Investments, which is in South Africa as well, where I am the ambassador. So I've really decided to participate in organizations that can make a difference.
Wow. Wow. That's breathtaking. Breathtaking, Rufaro. I feel so inspired. I want to come and join this event on the next one. Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah. So
you are welcome.
Thank you. I think you mentioned on another online event on women empowerment that I've seen that you've participated in one of the main obstacles women faces in terms. So what do you think can be done to inject confidence and reassurance, particularly in African women and girls, to make sure they don't get in the way of their own achievements?
Yeah. For me, I find that sharing my story, it's a good story on its own, because it shows that it's exactly that I'm coming from that space, but look at what one can become. So I look for platforms where I can share my story in terms of where I came from and what I've managed to achieve. And also find platforms to mentor other women, which I really try to do a lot. And one is to really make it very practical and write about it as well. So I think the more other young women see real people, the more they can relate with them and know that they can also achieve whatever their passions are.
Yes. So as a business developer, you've been very active in finding growth drivers and avenues for business expansion. Have you seen gender diversity and inclusion yourself positively impact businesses? Do you sort of have on the ground experience of that?
I think when one looks at Africa, for me, I think what is very assuring is the parliaments in Africa are changing, especially when it comes to inclusion. I was looking at a certain report which was done on parliaments, worldwide. I think they looked at the trends from 1995 to 2020. And if you look at that during those 25 years, the country which had the highest representation of women was Sweden, with about 40.3% of women representation. And if you look at in 2020, the country with the highest number was Rwanda, which is in Africa, with 61%. And also in the top 20, five countries in the top 20 are in Africa. So policy is basically showing to say women can be trusted, women can lead, women should be included in decision making. So it makes it easier for organizations to actually follow suit. So for me, from where I'm sitting at, I think a lot of Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, we can see a whole lot that is starting to happen in terms of women leadership. But what we also see in organizations, if I look at, let's say, from a gender inclusion perspective, some organizations are doing it faster because they've realized that, the more we do this, it is the right thing to do to start off. But on the other end, it gives us the competitive edge because more people can relate with us. If there are more women, our clients can also relate with us.
Yes, and more talent, more talent pool.
Exactly. But others are still very cautious, and it all depends on the leadership. For me, leadership is so the different leaders and how they lead their organizations, they really determine whether inclusion is going to happen faster or slower. But I must say, if I just look at when I did my MBA, my thesis at the time, it was also about, do organizations that have got transformation, are they more profitable than those that haven't? And it was interesting, and it was mostly in South Africa. And it really proved, in my thesis, it proved that, those organizations that really focus on diversity and inclusion are more profitable than those that do not. So yes, there are some companies that are doing it and others are still getting there.
That's fascinating. Did you ever publish your PhD thesis?
This one was really on my MBA one. The
MBA.
PhD thesis is published, but yeah, the MBA, MBA is not a very big thesis as much as the PhD. So my
Yeah.
MBA, I didn't publish it, but I must say that was the research that I found. Maybe I need to publish it. I've never thought about it, but it's proven, I think, in so many platforms that diverse organizations, they make more profit.
Yes, yeah. I think, and it's such a compelling argument, isn't it? Once you can actually make that argument. I mean, apart from it being the right thing to do, it's very, very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, just on the same theme, what key differences have you noticed between companies that do try to have such inclusion perspectives versus those that don't? What do you think the key differences are? What were the drivers of that?
For me, what I have seen is really it comes from leadership that is very deliberate in terms of where they want to be. So it's about being deliberate. The second one is they actually take it as a strategic imperative because they know that transformation is important. And some of them use it as a competitive edge because they know that if their clients can relate with this, then maybe, we are going to have more clients in the space. And it really becomes those that really do it well. It's ingrained in the culture of the organization. Really, the DNA of the organization really becomes part of inclusion, is really part of that.
Yes, yeah. So turning now to men, and what advice would you have for African men in professional workplaces to help foster this kind of inclusive work environment, which seems to benefit everybody? Do you think there's any specific policy frameworks or programs in this area?
Yeah, I think if I look at in South Africa where we are, there is policy to ensure that women, there's equal representation. So I think it's helping a lot. But what I can say generally to men as well is really being able to give women, to create platforms for women to also contribute. Because as we know, women will bring women issues into the boardroom. And when women issues are brought into the boardroom, I'm just giving as an example. Let's say people are thinking about, the branding that needs to be on a soap, for example. If there is a woman in that boardroom where they are making decisions in terms of whether it's branding or the colors, there are women that can say, you know what, this doesn't work for women. So it helps in terms of really making decisions that can resonate with their clients. So the more women they have in those boardroom in the decision-making process, the better it will actually benefit their business and their clients, because it means whatever products, whatever strategy that they come up with, it doesn't exclude women. And the women, as we know, they are about 50% of the population anyway.
Totally. Yeah. So moving to something else, workplace harassment. It's obviously a very difficult topic to discuss, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And, we need to evaluate it. How do you think that women could be equipped to handle issues like this without being sort of silenced out of fear, whether of just social pressure, perhaps, or fear of reprisal or lack of promotion or lack of social acceptability, perhaps?
I think I'm lucky that I did not experience it, but I know that it does happen. I would propose that, by understanding, especially the organizational policies, understand their rights, and really find someone within the organization that they can trust to be able to share and maybe ask the questions. And maybe they can become their voices or to some extent. And I know that in some countries, there actually are some organizations where someone not necessarily within the organization to even go and maybe, raise some of these issues, which makes it even better. But it's quite important for them to understand their rights and find someone who can really help them.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yes, like you, I've been fortunate in my career. This hasn't been something which I've particularly encountered myself, but clearly it sounds terrible. So, from the time when you were first employed, have you seen changes? Have you seen improvements in terms of opportunities and resources for women? I know we still have a long way to go, but what do you think, has the dial shifted during your own working life?
Yeah, if I look at when I started, which is, I don't know how many decades back, and where I am now, a lot has been driven by policy, especially in South Africa, where I am at the moment. But what I can also say is, like I mentioned earlier, with parliaments really transforming, especially on the continent, and also having women in a lot of these leadership positions, it has shown what is possible. And there is more and more trust by leaders to appoint women into influential positions. But all I can say is the pace is still very slow in certain industries and certain sectors. One would want to see more and more, happening, because if you look at universities now, we've got a lot of women that that have really acquired education for them to be able to lead in certain organizations. So I strongly feel that more can be done, but there has been some transformation.
That's good. Well, that's good to hear. So, from your experience, what do you think are the factors which impact a woman's ability to lead other people? Are there any particular factors you would pinpoint?
I think it really starts with your self-confidence, because if one doesn't have self-confidence, what tends to happen also is then people can actually see your self-doubt. And when there's self-doubt, unfortunately, there are certain people that thrive on that self-doubt and really bring you down. So I strongly feel that for women, it's quite important to have self-confidence, understand what the role entails, and make sure that you surround yourself with the right people that can support you in that role.
Right, totally. Yeah. So, how would you encourage women not to give up if they think they're being faced with gender bias?
Wow. I think the more they hear people's stories, the more they realize that those people that have succeeded is because they made some challenges along the way. So for them to even get to where they need to get to, it's through those challenges that they can grow as individuals. And so the most important thing is, the confidence, but also claim your space. And you can claim your space ensuring that you've got the right skills, because many times when one doesn't have the right skills that are required for the role, it becomes very difficult for one to perform what is required in the role. And also the emotional intelligence, at times we don't talk much about it, but that's what plays a lot in the boardroom, because it's really about how do you understand the dynamics, what needs to happen, and how do you manage situations as they take place. But the last one for me, find a mentor. If you're not strong enough yet, find a mentor. There are so many people out there, with both men and women, that are willing to support and help, and they want to give back to society. So maximize on those opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, do you think there's any particular way that when you look at sort of female leaders, they could be equipped so they can support other women in organizations? We've talked a lot about self-confidence and all these things, but, how can women help other women in organizations? Do you think there's something more structured that we should be doing around that?
I strongly feel it's quite important. Maybe not necessarily formally, but there are individuals out there that have got knowledge that can create platforms. I think I've given you an example of the Me Time organization. It was started in 2014. Someone just woke up and said, you know what, I can see more and more of my friends, or, some young people, they are battling with skills and self-confidence. What can I do? And she created an organization. If I look at now, is 750 members. I told you that now we are working on creating a cooperative financial institution, but it was just an idea from someone who felt, you know what, I can create a platform for that. I've mentioned about women in tech. when one also looks at how it was founded, it was also an individual who came up with, women in tech, they need more support because it's mostly male dominated, that industry. And if you look at as in today, we are talking of 180,000 members, and the aim is to empower about 5 million people. If I look at the Sherry Blair Foundation, the mentoring the platform that is created for mentoring. In Southern Africa, we have got the Gracia Machel Trust. And the other day, I was reading a lot about some of the women startups that, if you look at where they are now, by joining that Gracia Machel Trust, because it creates this platform for networking and really learning and growing, their businesses have really, really grown. So for me, I still think platforms can be created to really support women, and they can become the best they can be.
Right. So do you think that organizations like workplaces should sort of get involved with a platform, or should they have their own mentoring programs to support women leaders, or maybe a mixture of the two?
I think it's really a mixture of the two, because at times people do not have confidence to start one, right? So if the workplace can create and facilitate and maybe even sponsor the creation of such a platform, I strongly feel that it can work. If I look at WomVest, for example, I became one of the ambassadors for WomVest. And if you look, when I attended the launch of WomVest, the founder, she works for a certain organization, which actually sponsored the launch itself. So in a way, the organization is saying, you know what, we believe in our female employees and we support what they do, and we are helping them achieve what they want to achieve, especially being able to help other women. So I actually think it can be done, both organizations supporting their employees, but also it can also be really in a network of individuals, like-minded people that can create some of these networks to be able to help and support.
Yes, that would be brilliant, I think. Yeah. So in Southern Africa, you have a lot of knowledge of the whole region. Are there any particular male-dominated industries which have actually increased the female participation over the last, say, 10 years or so?
What I can say, I know more about the financial services.
Well, tell me about financial services then. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, no, I've been there for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And if I look at when I started to where we are now, all I can say is I've really seen that transformation. Yes, we are still not at an equity level, but if one looks at the journey, if I look at the certified financial planners, for example, that we have in South Africa, which is really from a financial planning perspective, you can see that it's still it's still mostly men, but more and more women are starting to come up. I think I mentioned about where I went to speak to a network of women in financial planning. It's really young financial planners, women that are saying, you know what, how do we support each other in this industry? Because, it's a tough industry.
Yes.
And they created a platform for themselves. And there are organizations that are sponsoring that initiative, because they can see that it's going to grow and really help increase the number of women in the industry as well.
Yes. That's amazing. That's really, really wonderful initiative. So do you think there's increased presence generally in the tech industry?
If one looks at the platforms that are there, that are being encouraged, women, more and more women, I must say, they are starting to realize that they can be anything that they can be. And remember, you are also dealing with a different generation from my generation. My generation, it was more of, you know what, you are not a leader, I'm just talking about from a rural perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But if I look at today's girls, they know that they can be anything that they want to be. So I think it's really helping because of the generation they are growing up in, and they are really there as go-getters, and it's really transforming the industry on the continent.
That's brilliant. And do you think there's policy changes that focus on gender inclusivity? Do you think they are helping change mindsets of women entrepreneurs, or do you think it's more action in the workplace that's the important thing?
I think To some extent, because organizations are expected to comply, it does help to some extent because it raises that awareness to say it's more like we are watching you. You need to do the right things. But on the other hand, depending on the leadership again, if the leadership, you know what, we are not ready to change, they will always find ways to work against the regulation. But I strongly feel that having regulation helps to sensitize people, especially leaders, in terms of what's expected.
I do too. Yeah, I do think that anti-discrimination legislation can set a floor and really change behaviour over time as well. Yeah. I mean, to come on to a difficult subject, which is STEM subjects and women's representation in STEM. How do you think we can improve that? You know, what initiatives could look to expand women studying STEM subjects and working in the STEM areas? Because I think that's still a relatively lower area and across the world, actually.
Yeah, so like I've said, I strongly feel that it needs to start, I think, at an early age, from primary education to secondary to high school and also even a tertiary. And more girls being exposed to what is possible. And I must say, if you look at today's generation, I think they're actually quite privileged because now with all the tech that we have, the platforms that they have, now with the pandemic, people working from home, I think it has really exposed girls and boys as well in terms of what is possible.
Yeah.
So when you look at trying to change some of the platforms, just because women tend to gravitate towards at times subjects that are, that are not necessarily tech, it then requires some leadership. And I think I mentioned earlier about especially my participation in Women in Tech, and how we are making it very practical, where we even donate even computers. We identify women at certain universities, like we work with the Western Cape, where women actually participate in the This Is Me program, and we inspire them so that we also don't have dropouts. You know, as they are going on this career, how do we ensure that they know that yes, the going can get tough, but it doesn't mean that you can still not achieve what you wanted to achieve. So for me, it's really about organizations that are taking the lead and making sure that women's voices are heard.
Yeah. I think there's been some Commonwealth initiatives in the past 10 years or so about women, and there was a Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians Africa region program about helping women increase their presence in political decisions. Are you familiar with that work and how it's being monitored?
I'm not very familiar with that work, but what I can say to you is I like the quote by Mahatma Gandhi that says, "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Yes.
And with that, I actually feel that we need to build capacity for the future. And it's quite important to create that platform to be able to track and monitor what is being done, because if you don't do that, we'll never be able to see results and to see what works and what doesn't work. So it's really about, we need action. And for me, it's important that these initiatives are seen through to be able to achieve their objectives.
I mean, if you could think of another Commonwealth initiative that we should be putting forward for women, what would that be?
If I look at my involvement with mentorship at the moment, and the fact that I get someone who is based in Australia, for example, like I've mentioned, someone who is in Netherlands who says, you know what, actually, even though you're based in Africa, I think you've got the skills that I can tap into and to grow my business. I think if you can create a platform for mentorship, I'm not sure how we can structure it. I actually think the more we mentor, the more I think we can make more and more people become stronger.
Yes.
And they can really fulfill their dreams.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let's work on that. So, I mean, Africa has its own issues. You know, the agricultural sector is so important. There's an informal work sector that's important. If more women go into business, how do you think that balance will work?
I think this notion of women are supposed to be working on farms and in agriculture, I think we really need to dispel, I think, that thought. And also, what I actually feel is I would rather, because you've got very creative people now, especially with technology, one would rather fund women businesses, because I think we have actually, if you look at that research that Martina actually shared, we show
Yeah.
that African women, I think there are more entrepreneurs in Africa, which is even more women entrepreneurs in Africa, which is about 4 times in Europe, right?
I know, isn't it fantastic?
Yes, so it already shows that there's so much entrepreneurship is buzzing on the continent. Why not give women money so that we can mechanize agriculture? So agriculture, because they are experts in agriculture, this is what we are saying. They don't necessarily have to be doing it themselves, but if you give them money, they can actually change that environment.
Yes, yes. So do you think there's any way we could sort of tear down some of the perhaps biases to empower women to do that more in Africa?
Exactly, because they are showing us that they can do it. They can do it. That's why there are more entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs on the continent. More, so for me, on that alone, it already tells you that because of our struggles, we know exactly what problems we can solve. Because you can't bring someone who comes from someone else to come and say, mechanize my farm. Give that person money to mechanize it because they know how it can be done. So I strongly feel that if you give them funding, because we know that women funding is also normally less than that of men.
Yes.
So
yes.
if you fund women, they can solve a lot of those problems.
Right. So it's not an either or. So say some women have a huge knowledge of an understanding of the climate for their farming and what sets their region apart. They should be the ones who are empowered to take forward some of the entrepreneurship in that area. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So do you think there's any need to reassure men, particularly in Africa, businessmen, that, this isn't a zero-sum game, that more women in business is not a cause of that for them to be insecure, that actually it's going to make the pie bigger?
I think it's also quite important for us to actually educate men where we can, for them to really understand that women generally were not raised as leaders, right? They were not raised to be assertive. They're not raised to ask questions, So there's a lot of the way they were brought. And I'm talking from a rural perspective. And I'm also talking of an older generation, not necessarily the generation of today. And so because of that, we also know that women are caregivers as well. They are the primary caregivers of kids. So the more women have some element of education, the more they can make the right decisions as well. So for me, I always say, if we can have women at least, being educated up to primary school, yes, secondary school, we want them to, but at least if every woman has got primary education, I still think they can make a lot of the right decisions for their kids, for that newborn child, because they've got a lot of awareness as well. So I think going back to what we are saying about that assurance, it's nice for men to understand where women are coming from, but on the other hand, the pie is too big for us not to share. So we can share that pie. We are just growing the pie. They are not going to lose their status. We'll still respect them, but let's just share the pie. I think.
Yes, let's all have bigger pieces of the pie.
Yeah.
So, all of this, though, it does bring its own pressures, I think, for women, doesn't it? Particularly for women in business. And I wondered if you have any advice for women entrepreneurs who are perhaps struggling with burnout or feeling very pressured or stressed, perhaps.
Yeah. So I think if I look, going back to what I said about women's careers don't necessarily go in a straight line. And if you look at the burnout, many times it comes from women taking so many roles.
Yes.
I think there was also stats that talks to women do enough times more caregiver work as compared to men.
Yeah.
And they are still expected to still perform in their day-to-day job. So with all that, for me, I think it becomes quite important for men to actually come in and also help out in terms of whether it's looking after the kids, whether it's cooking, or maybe, find someone who can help in some of those roles so that women can also, they don't have to be as burnt out as they are currently. But yes, I actually think it's quite important for them to have intimate knowledge of their work environment. And they should know that they can be the best they can be. And yeah, they can balance everything if they really manage it well.
Yes, yeah, yeah. One of the things I've read is that according to the World Health Organization, a great way of improving women's health across Africa is women's empowerment, and that possibly healthcare systems should be more sensitive and responsive to women's particular health needs. And I wondered if you had any thinking about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, but I think for me, it's about bringing the issues to the authorities because it's quite important, and also empowering women to speak out, especially and be more assertive.
Yeah, yeah. So I understand that you've started a new business quite recently, and congratulations on that. Could you tell us a bit more about it? And has COVID affected it at all? Tell us about your recent experience.
Yeah, I think one thing that I realized was that, yes, I had acquired a couple of skills over time, but they were not packaged in a way that one can be able to make impact onto the continent, as my aim was really to make impact. So, yeah, so what I now do, especially after backing up my skills with some studies, is I normally say my company actually connect capital to opportunities because we know that on the continent, that's where a lot of there's potential. You know, when you look at growth on the continent, there's so much opportunities for growth because we have a lot of problems to solve. And my business really points companies to those opportunities to say, you know what, we need to develop the continent. This is what happens. And as part of that, yeah, so I work with a couple of corporates where I really help them to when they are looking for opportunities on the continent, and I become that torchbearer. I've really become an expert on the continent at this point in time.
That's amazing and inspiring. And, you know, it's just been so great to talk to you. I just can't think of a better way of spending Women's Day. You know, thank you so much, Rufaro. It's really great. So I think now that we've heard a lot about your own experience and your own journey, which has been absolutely riveting, let's see what questions that we have from the audience. We have a few minutes still to deal with those. So let me have a look here. Here's one. Dr. Pearson Sibanda. We've started seeing that increasingly Africans, specifically women, are taking spaces to participate in the economic development of the continent. As someone who's so passionate about the development of the continent, given your PhD studies doing business in Africa, what initiatives are you personally involved in to make your contributions?
Wow. Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, no, I think a lot, some of it, I think I'd responded to in my discussions earlier, but what I can say is finding spaces where I can personally contribute. I think I mentioned about Me-Time Cooperative Financial Institution, where I'm quite involved. That's one, and where I'm a chairperson, just to make sure that we create this institution where people can learn to save money, people can borrow, and be able to send their children to school or even fund their businesses as well. It's something that we started this year, and I'm quite excited about that. I also mentioned about my participation, especially with women in tech. Like right now, we've got this mentorship program where I raised my hand, and yeah, I'm mentoring about 3 people at the moment. And Wombvest, I'm always sitting with them in terms of helping these young women in investments and being able to really support some startups from a fundraising perspective. So those are just a few of my involvement, but I speak a lot on a couple of platforms where I really try to inspire young women with my story.
That's great. That's great. So there's another question here from Zonto. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Wow. The advice that I would give to my younger self is you don't need to focus on academic qualifications. You just need to be smart. The other day I was drawing a picture in terms of my career and my education. And if I had just drawn a straight line in terms of where I am today, To be honest, I would have done that in 10 years rather than the 30 years that I took to be where I am today. So I think it's about finding the right networks, being very clear from day one in terms of what one wants to be, and understanding the skills that are required so that one focuses on those skills. And also really being very deliberate about whatever one does. If one feels that, one needs to connect with certain people because they've got better knowledge, find ways to connect with those people. So being very deliberate in my space, I think I would have been much smarter and I would have reached my destination much quicker.
Well, you did pretty well. So Keith is asking, are there benefits for entrepreneurs setting up their businesses in Jersey? Well, I guess you are working with Jersey Finance, so you presumably know about that.
Yeah. So if one sets up a business in Jersey, we also know that it's really a gateway to Europe. It's easy to raise funds. It really creates that platform to fuel development of the continent because as we know, Jersey, it has got, economic and political stability. So it's really easier to attract capital. So if one sets up their company in Jersey, it's much easier to deploy capital on the continent, especially for the African entrepreneurs. Jersey is a very good place to set up because one can be able to attract capital and grow your business.
Yeah, that's very important, isn't it? Yeah, and possibly even listing on a stock exchange at some point or something like that. Yeah. So here's a question from Zanel. In your view, do you think that in Africa, female entrepreneurship is sometimes not so much a choice, but a necessity? And what challenges come with that?
Yeah, I think this has been demonstrated by those statistics that show that female entrepreneurs on the continent, much more than anywhere else in any region, because women on the continent, we tend, people tend to leave their work to look after children, the caregiving that we've spoken about. And at times just for survival's sake, so a lot of women entrepreneurs on the continent, they've become entrepreneurs mainly because of necessity. And that's why we find that they also battle in terms of, their businesses because they don't have a lot of skills because it was necessity. Whilst if you look at men, a lot of men go into entrepreneurship because they also have a lot of self-confidence. So with women, yes, it's because of necessity. And with those challenges, it basically means we need to support women entrepreneurs as much as we can, especially women that have really done well in business, to give back and find opportunities to mentor these young ones and give them a lot of self-confidence.
Yeah. So let me see what other questions. We probably have time for a couple more. Okay, well, there's a couple of more granular questions. What resources are there if I want to start a tech startup for online education in South Africa? What resources can I use?
Wow. Yeah. In South Africa, there are a lot of incubators and startup programs that are there. And, just to name a few, I know there's a Spring Lab, which is a technology incubator, especially from a technology perspective. I also know that there's the Innovation Hub, which is a technology incubator. There's Founders Factory. We also have some programs, especially from a government perspective, like the Small Business Development Agency, which really helps in terms of, advising and creating business seminars, especially for startups. We also have the Department of Trade and Industry, which helps, with some small grants for businesses as well. So yeah, we do have a variety of resources that people can actually access in South Africa.
That's very useful to know, isn't it? And you can find all those online, presumably, right? Or is there a particular place you should go to find them?
Yes, they can find them online. Yeah, you are quite right.
Okay. Here's another one. How can I help my daughter's education to equip her better for the future if she wants to be an entrepreneur? Yeah.
So I think me being an entrepreneur in my old age, and what I've learned is that, to be honest, being an entrepreneur, you are a jack of all trades. And as a jack of all trades, you need to understand finance, you need to understand marketing, you need to understand all the different areas of business, I guess. But what really fuels entrepreneurship is the passion. So it all starts with the passion. So for me, yes, a business management degree is good enough, but the passion is what drives someone. They sleep on it, they wake up on it, they are building their idea all the time. So for me, it's really about a dose of passion. That's the biggest that one can ever have.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And the passion brings the resilience to deal with the difficult stuff that goes with it all, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we have time for more questions, although there are more. And so if anybody would like us to answer questions by email, if you could email us at events@commonwealthchamber.com. I'll put that in the chat. Do email us and we'll do our best to get back to you. I'm sure Dr. Macheka would be happy to provide some answers going forward. And so that brings us to the end of this fireside chat. I just have been blown away by Dr. Macheka. I just love this conversation and thank you so much. And to be honest, if this doesn't inspire you listening, I just don't know what will. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be talking to you today, Dr. Macheka. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Juliet, and the viewers.
That's great. Thank you. So to everybody who's joined, your views matter to us. So please, could you kindly complete the evaluation form that's linked in the chat box? Once you click the link, please scan the QR code and you'll be able to use it. And we do look forward to seeing you again. And thank you so much, Dr. Macheka, and happy Women's Day, everybody. Thank you. Bye. Bye.